Hi, and today I'd like to talk about the destructive nature of enemies within national politics, whatever nation it may be. The idea that another side, whether that be a different party, which is more usually how we consider it, or even a different faction within the same party, considering them the enemy can be it's destructive for everyone. It's not at all helpful. Now, where I come from, the current UK government, the Conservatives, I believe their core principles are destructive to the country. I think they are very bad for the vast majority of people in the country, and potentially I can make an argument for everyone in the country, even though those who think they gain from them. But then there's two sides to a government. There's one is their core principles, and the other is what they're capable of delivering. So even if you don't believe that, or let's say I didn't believe that the core principles of the current government were destructive, I still believe that the current government are, just because not only are they not competent enough to put anything in place. So they may have a mind, okay, I want to put this in place because then there's going to be this knock-on effect. If they're incompetent, you don't get the useful knock-on effect because you get something totally unpredictable because they don't know what they're doing. And within the current government, of course, you have factions against each other. The defining political problem at the moment is, of course, Brexit, how to carry out Brexit. We still don't, as electorate, know exactly what's going to happen. We sort of know we're getting towards endgame. By the end of November, surely we will have to know. It's not like we suddenly find out on the day we've left the EU in a few months' time. We'll have to find out sometime in November, because whatever deal is agreed, which will then have to be made public, it has to be ratified by every nation that is remaining within the EU, as well as ourselves, of course. So, yeah, but at the moment, there's no real cooperation going on. There's no cooperation going on between, say, Labour and the Conservatives, and indeed other significant parties, whether it be SNP, which is a very major party still within Parliament, or even the Lib Dems, who are a little bit less so, and the others as well. But even within those parties, like Labour has factions against each other, not quite as split, in fact, not nearly as split as the Conservatives, but there is that against each other. Now, what's really prompted me to sort of think about this and talk about this is a tweet by Brian Cox, which was a reply to an MP, a Labour MP, someone who's supposedly representing me, he used the phrase, never interrupt an enemy when they're making a mistake. Now, of course, it's just a quote. Brian Cox is saying, the government of the day are not your enemy. I pay you and them to work together in Parliament in the interest of the country. So drop the party BS and find a solution to our current predicament by working together. Now, there's two aspects to this. First of all, Brian Cox's statement, I totally agree with that. There needs to be much more. There is plenty of cooperation that happens between people of different parties on areas where they share common ground. I mean, surely the common ground that everyone should share is what is in the best interest of the nation. And this is where, even with Brexit, remember, in Parliament, when it comes to the MPs, a vast majority of MPs do not want Brexit. Doesn't matter what party they're in. The majority of Conservative MPs didn't want Brexit. The majority of Labour ones didn't, even though some do in both those parties. SNP, Green Party with only one, they don't want Brexit. and the Northern Irish parties as well. No one really wants Brexit in terms of the parties. Certain individuals did, and they ran a better campaign, and that's why we're in this situation. But then there's the quote itself, never interrupt your enemy. Now, you could argue that Brian Cox is maybe over-exaggerating the use of the word enemy there, because it's a quote. It's just a quote. What he's basically saying, he could easily have used the word opponent, but that's not where the quote comes from. And of course, there are opponents within national politics. But I would still attack the sentiment here. It says, never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. The mistake they're referring to is something that's going to screw our country over. Now, let me be clear. It should be clear anyway for anyone who's watched any previous of my videos. I am a Remainer. Firm. That being said, Brexit is happening. It would be extremely messy. I mean, best case scenario from my point of view, in theory, is the Labour Party conference, which is going on, that the Labour Party members seem to be overwhelmingly in favour of at least another vote. Not necessarily on deciding to stay, but at least another vote, public vote. But then I think to myself, okay, well, that sounds great because that could lead, anything that sort of leads to us remaining in the EU, I'd be in favour of. However, it could be argued that it's all buggered either way now, because let's say we have another vote, and that vote is still to leave. It doesn't matter even if it's a piss poor margin like it was last time. And then that just gives more power to the people who said we should not only have Brexit, but a complete break. Basically, not even, that's the argument now that's been used by these chief Brexiteers. Oh, we're not even going to trade with Europe. You what? And then let's say we did vote to remain, but again by a small, because I don't think we'd overwhelmingly vote to remain. That's not realistic. Then you'd still have this situation where we'd sort of vote to remain. It wouldn't exactly be cheers all round, because we could also know, well, what, and from the EU's point of view as well, not only from ours, what happens in a few years' time if there's another one and we choose to leave again, the whole hideous process starts again. It's very messy. It's hugely messy. You might even wonder if the EU would just say, do you know what, sod you. I don't think they would, but just, So either way, it's just messy now. So I just think to myself, okay, we're leaving. We are leaving. But the idea of never instruct your enemy when making a mistake, that quote is supposed to be, for example, opposing nations. Now, you can understand unfriendly nations politicians being your enemy. That's, international politics. You can absolutely have enemies, because obviously the politician of an unfriendly nation is doing what is best for their country. And if they're an unfriendly nation, what's best for their country is generally what's worst for yours. But within a nation, even if you have radically different views on what you think is best for the country or best for its people, you cannot consider people within that country, that any politician from either side to be your enemy. Opponents on certain ideas, potentially even on core principles of governance, but not your enemy, never your enemy. Because that, even using that word, puts something in your brain that will never allow you to see common ground. And then this feeds through to the electorate, who will then also become very tribal about the situation. And I'll give you a little example from America, where this same thing happens. So, at the moment in America, of course, they're trying to appoint a Supreme Court judge. Now, this all seems very baffling to me as someone in Britain. In Britain, our judges are fiercely independent. Any intelligent person has political ideas, and therefore even judges in this country have potentially even political affiliations. But they are fiercely independent. And really, it's within the culture. Supreme Court judges, any court judges, High Court judges, but Supreme Court judges are the ones that will generally rule either in favour or against the government. And they will do so. They will do their jobs. They will apply the law as it exists, without fear or favour. America has a totally different system. America has a very political Supreme Court thing. And because there's 9 in it, there's almost always a balance either towards what they call liberalism, which doesn't seem to mean the same thing as our dictionary definition, and right-wing, extreme. And when it's right-wing, it is right-wing, proper right-wing. Because even their more liberal politicians are what I would consider right-wing. And so, yeah, they're trying to appoint someone at the moment who is one of those extreme right-wing ones. And there was a tweet somewhere. Where was it? Here we go. So this, it's not CNN Politics, the tweet is from them, but it's quoting a Republican Senate nominee saying, the accusations against Brett Kavanaugh are absurd because the assault attempt never went anywhere. And someone then replying, well, even if you leave empty-handed, trying to rob a bank is still a crime. So, yeah, the point they're trying to make is, well, attempted sexual assault is still a crime. It doesn't matter whether he actually succeeded in raping someone or not. He attempted to, and that is still a crime. And you really want to... I mean, you shouldn't really be appointing anyone onto a Supreme Court that has committed crimes of any nature, much less a very serious one like this. But the point is that the politicians are then making these excuses. See, that's the way things happen now. I'm going to talk about this in a moment as well. We should, in theory, know exactly what politicians think and do and get up to, and we should say, hang on a minute, we're not happy with that. But in reality, what happens is people, first of all, deny it. They deny the behaviour. And then when the evidence becomes irrefutable, because very often these days it's very easy to get evidence, then they just make excuses for it. And this feeds into the electorate. The electorate then carry on. Instead of the electorate standing up and going, no, actually, this is not acceptable, they make excuse on it. This is a tweet from or regarding some women going on television. And these are women excusing his behaviour, because now it's very apparent. What boy hasn't done this in high school? Well, two things about that. One, a hell of a lot of boys. You know, the idea that anyone, much less a group of women, would excuse it on the basis, oh, well, all men are rapists, really, what's the difference between this guy and another guy, is particularly appalling. Because one, it's not true. And two, it's excusing a behaviour that is unpalatable. And these things can only arise because we have this idea of an enemy, because that group of women were Republican women. The attacks on Brett Kavanaugh, let's face it, have mostly come from Democrats, because everything is down these party lines. The reason why Donald Trump has got away with as much stuff as he has is because the Republicans, the ones that were at the start extremely unhappy with him even getting the nomination, let alone, becoming their president. I'm not saying they wanted Hillary Clinton, but they wanted a different Republican president. They are towing the party line, because ultimately it's become the case that if they are seen to oppose any of these, policies, it's like they're on the Democrat side, and that can't possibly happen. So they don't get to stand up for truth or justice or the American way. They stand up for their party. And I don't think it's as extreme in Britain, but there is still a sense of that as well. That that's why I think a lot of the Remainers, the Europhiles within the ranks of the Conservative Party, have been much quieter, because they're feeling that they have to toe the party line. And it's destructive, because when you're towing the party line, and I understand there's a certain amount of loyalty is required, because at the end of the day, when you are elected, the party machine helps get you elected. Of course, there's loyalty there, that you don't do anything to harm the electoral chances of your party. And sometimes, yes, that does mean doing something you might not be all that proud of. But to blindly follow it all the time, even when it means acting or refusing to speak out against something that goes against the core principles of your party, because there is a point at which a leader of a political party can go against the core principles of that party, in which case you need to call them out. And I'm just going to end with, a quote again from Twitter, playing about on Twitter, Duncan Jones this time, saying, I think one of the most revealing and depressing parts of social media is the transparency we now have into the minds of our politicians. I can only hope that in time it will lead us to voting in more thoughtful people. But it won't, because this is yes, it was the case. 100 years ago, we could hardly know. As long as a politician didn't get caught out in a public scandal, it was much more difficult to do so then. It still happened. You wouldn't really know anything about a politician other than what they told us they did or thought. Now, 24-hour news and so easy. You don't need big, expensive equipment to go out and film someone. You can just do it with a pair of glasses. It's so difficult for any politician to lie about how they feel or how they'd act, because someone will instantly call out a situation where they've contradicted themselves. But it makes no difference. Donald Trump contradicts himself all the time during his political campaign. Makes no difference, because people will go through the following phases. They will, one, deny that he ever said the other thing or did the other thing. And then when the proof is evident, they'll just make excuses. And that excuse can be as pathetic as, oh, well, that was last year. Yeah? And we get the same in this country as well. We get the same in Britain. But people will just, they'll first of all deny it. And then when they can't deny it, they will make an excuse. And it's purely because they will never, ever allow themselves to try and see another point of view, because that other point of view comes from the enemy. And we will never get more thoughtful politicians until we as an electorate are more thoughtful ourselves. We get the electorate that we collectively deserve because we vote these people in. We have a choice. We don't exercise it. You know, some people choose not to vote. Just fine. I'm not in favour of compulsory voting. But when you choose not to vote because you think, well, all the politicians are rubbish, well, you are contributing to all those politicians being rubbish by not voting. Because if you were to go along, you don't have to vote for anyone. If you just go along and spoil your ballot, don't write a rude word on it because the people count and it's not their fault. But, you know, spoil your ballot, you've still counted as voting. Therefore, your vote is up for grabs as far as those politicians are concerned. And it will encourage more thoughtful politicians. But we have to start first. There will never be more thoughtful politicians until we have a more thoughtful electorate voting for them. And that's what's most depressing about all this. We now know what a politician really feels, despite what they say. We know what a politician would do in a situation, regardless of what they say they would do, because they've probably been in that situation, they've been around long enough, and we've observed what they would do in that same situation. But we still vote for them because, we'll first of all deny the poor behaviour, and then we'll make excuses for it. But anyway, those are my thoughts on that. Let me know what you're thinking down below. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content. Until next time, I'll see you later.